Welcome everyone to the second Recreational Trails Program webinar. Today's session is exclusively focused on the pre-application materials. So our first webinar that we did really focused on project planning and the overall requirements of the program. If this is your first time hopping on, that webinar was recorded and we encourage you to view that afterwards. I think we'll get it dropped into the chat here soon, maybe a link to that webinar so you can access it immediately after. But today's session, as I said, is all about the pre-application materials. If we haven't met, my name is Lauren Pyle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Outdoor Recreation Grants Manager. So I am joined today on this presentation by Claire Polfus. Claire, do you want to introduce yourself at all?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Polfus, and I serve as the Recreation Program Manager for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, and I'll be helping out with one small portion of this webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire. And then we also have our other grant specialists here today on the call. We've got Joseph Kill and Marlena Baker. So Joe will be providing technical support behind the scenes, and then Marlena will be there helping drop stuff into the chat. So you'll see them both active in those spaces. And so with this, I'll go ahead and really just dig in for everyone. And so what we're going to be going through today are the 5 required pieces and documents that are required for the pre-application. So this includes the pre-application form, the work plan template, the budget, the climate resilience risk form, and permit navigator and project review sheets. And then at the end, we'll be able to have that time for Q&A. So with these, for each of these ones, we're going to be going through both what are we looking for in these documents and how to navigate them. So we'll be covering both of those pieces for each of these components. Pretty much everything we're going to be talking about today is addressed in some way, shape, or form in the pre-application guidance. So you will also get a copy of the slides for this session afterwards, but that resource, the pre-application guidance, is another great place to go to dig in more. And so we're going to start with the first of the 5 documents that's required for the pre-application for the Recreational Trails Program, and that is the pre-application form. This is a really short, quick, fillable PDF. And this is our space to really ask a lot of the core information about the project so we just know what's going on in the pre-application phase. And we ask about really 3 big buckets of content information within this form. The first thing we're asking about is who is applying to the program. So there are questions related to what is the, what is the entity that is applying for the program? Is it a nonprofit, a municipal entity, or some other group? We're also asking for the application contact within that form. This is the person that we will be reaching out to regarding the status of the pre-application. It may or may not be the person actually doing the project, but this is the person who will get informed whether or not you've been selected to move forward to the full application phase. So just when you fill out the form, make sure that's the person you share. The next bucket of questions within that form are our project information. We're looking for a high-level overview about the project you're submitting. So things like a title for the project, the general location of the project, if it's a flood recovery project or a standard RTP project. What type of project is it? Is it maintenance? Is it new construction? What are the recreation types that are there? And we'll be asking for a short project overview. We're asking that you keep this at about 150 words or less because this is not the space to make your case statement for the program. This is not your pitch to us so much as it is a general summary so that we know what's happening within the project. Like, what are you doing? Where is it? And the high level of why. If you're trying to figure out how on earth can I put this all in 150 words, check out the pre-application guidance section on this because we actually have an example of this clearly shown within that. because we're looking for things like, oh, well, my town is going to is asking for funding to replace the trail that goes over the such and such river or the bridge that goes over the such and such river on the XYZ trail. We're replacing this bridge because it washed out in floods and it's a prominent connector to this other network and we need to replace it. That's really all the level of detail we're looking for at this stage in the game. During the full application phase, if you're invited to move forward, that's the space where you'll get to make your case statement and your powerful need and all those details. So this is really just to help us have a general understanding so that when we open your work plan and your budget, we kind of know what's going on for us as the staff review. The third category of things that we'll be asking for in the pre-application form are about the land ownership. So we want to know who owns the land, what types of landowner permissions are needed, and if you don't already have those landowner permissions, what's your plan for securing those? And so just to give you a little preview of the form, this is an example of what it is. As I said, it's a fillable PDF, and there's sort of these grayed out sections within the box, within the form. These are the pieces that you will click to fill in. You know, for example, I took a screenshot of the landowner permission section. So you would read the options, pick which one of the three boxes best describes your situation, and click it and move on to the next question. So it's a pretty short, simple form overall. It's just a few pages long. And so once you fill out that form, be sure to save your updated responses, and that'll be one of the things you email us. The next component for the pre-application is the work plan. And the work plan is really your space to give us that more in-depth description of what's happening with this work. What are you doing? Who's going to do it? What is it going to accomplish? And when's it going to happen? And we ask that you separate the activities that require different people, materials, or significant timelines. One of the really important things to note within work plans is that they should not include named contractors. They should not include named contractors. So even if you've gotten quotes from, a couple of different companies and you're thinking you want to go with this one, don't put that company name in your work plan. Instead, say a contractor will complete this type of work, or a youth crew will complete this type of work. Use general descriptors, not specific names. And the way you can think about breaking up your work plan is really just the different phases of the project. So some potential activity types might include, surveying, design, and engineering, if there's anything left on that to do, permitting, final planning in relation to bids, quotes, and budgeting. If you have various construction phases or construction elements, right? You have the parking lot and the bridge and the bathroom and the signs, separate those different construction components. And then if you have any site visits, events, or other things that you want to describe as part of it, you can think about describing those within the work plan. We're currently within the pre-application period. So this is pretty much the same timeline image that we showed in the first webinar. But we're talking about it now to help you think about your work plan. Because within this, the pre-applications are due December 6th. Full applications are going to be due at the end of January. We have review. Then after our review, we submit all the projects to the Federal Highway Administration for their final approval and authorization. That'll happen sometime this spring. So no work is allowed to begin until after that Federal Highway Administration authorization comes through. In some cases, we might start identifying the need for an ARA, an archaeological resource assessment, if that's been identified as a need for your project. This is a compliance piece. That's a test that we need to do in some cases, right, in order to clear the historic preservation review or Section 106 review. So that in some cases could happen after the federal highway authorization comes through. But then the main project period has to wait until after we have that grant agreement in place. And for the sake of this timeline in your work plan, we're considering that period from about July 14th, 2025 through December 6th of 2026. So you'll have really most of the field season in 2025 and all of the field season in 2026 to plan for your working period. Once you start digging in to the work plan template, we have provided this for you in a Microsoft Word form. It can also be opened in a Google Docs form using that same template. And if you have any technical challenges opening it in whatever system you have, please let us know and we'll be happy to try to provide support for you. But we have a work plan template. And things to know about using this template are to go ahead and break things into steps. Use bullets. This does not have to be long sentences to describe your work. Short and sweet is fine, just so long as you're including all the steps in timeline order. But please try to make these descriptions of this work clear and concise for someone outside of your organization who may or may not have the same level of expertise as you do, so that anybody could understand it. And the way I like to think about it, if anybody here has ever watched or heard of the Great British Baking Show, your work plan shouldn't read like a technical challenge in that show. That's one of the gimmicks that they often do, is that they get really bared down directions, and it's up to the contestants to do it, to figure it out, right? The people writing the directions have the phenomenal experience and expertise, but sometimes those people reading it have no clue what they're talking about. And we're just asking you to think about your work plan as a way that communicates that in full detail and doesn't assume steps. So it's able to show your experience and your expertise and that you've thought everything through. We also recommend within the work plan template, and this is new for this year, is that we're asking folks to separate the components of the project that would be funded by their RTP project and then other work that is complementary to that initiative. Because we know in the past that sometimes when people submit proposals, we get all kinds of things as a part of a work plan because their RTP project is part of a bigger picture, right? It's a whole trail network revitalization program. And they're asking from RTP just support for project component B. But there's A, C, and D that are happening outside of this. And maybe there are things that are ineligible for RTP that they're planning on doing that folks want the ranking committee to know. And so you'll see this in the work plan template. There's actually a section at the top of the work plan for your RTP request. And then there's a section at the bottom for everything else that you think the ranking committee should know. You don't have to use the section at the bottom. It's truly an optional section, but it just helps us to understand, to say, oh, this group is asking for $20,000 for this work. When we're looking at this work plan, like, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars of work, right? Over years and years and years. It helps us to distill, this is the RTP component, and this is really the other work that's happening beyond this grant that's going to help support that, if that applies. And so just to show you a little bit about what this template looks like, we ask at the top for the trail name to be descriptive. If you're planning to use an acronym, please help define that at the top. Don't rely on other materials to make sure whatever that reference is. So give us the trail name. If there's any descriptions of the trail, of the location of work, that's helpful at the top. The location, the city, the city and town name. And then again, that activity column is the first column on the left. These can just be really high level descriptions. What are you doing at this phase? The description column, the next one over, is where you're going to break it down into the details for us. Who's doing the work? What are the pieces that you need to do that work? What's going to be happening there, as sort of short, sweet bullets. And then there's a column for anticipated results. These are going to be pieces that are those quantifiable lists of potential end products that you could say, once this part is done, this is how we'll know. This is what's going to come out of it. And we'll get into those in just a second a little bit more. And then the last two columns are the start date and the end date. One of the requests we've received in the past is to get more examples like this. And this example right here is actually a screenshot of the example that's included at the very end of the application guidance that even has more rows on it. So if you want to see the examples of the types of information level of detail we're looking for in a work plan, we encourage you to look at that example that's in the pre-application guidance. And so for those anticipated results, these are pieces in the past that we've realized that sometimes applicants have the hardest time describing. And really, these anticipated results just have to be What is the measurable thing you're going to accomplish if you are successful? Uh, and if you don't know, you can give a range or use for clarifiers like at least or up to be able to help describe that work. We're doing water bars. How many? We're going to build a bridge. How long? So think about those any way you can put a number on that final result. And that's what we're looking for, because this is an opportunity for us to pull out those pieces of success so that we can understand what you're going to accomplish. And it's okay, when people build work plans, we know that some people are lumpers and some people are splitters, right? Some people want to say, this is the big bucket of activity, and here's all the steps within the same line. Other people really do like to tease out every single little piece. And so, depending on how you write your work plan, it's okay to not have a result for every single line. Sometimes it just might not make sense depending on what's in your work plan. And so, just some examples of what these results could look like. This could be things like miles of new trail, miles of maintained trail, number of bridges, length of bridges, number of culverts, all these sorts of descriptors that can quantify like how much or how long are you going to be doing this work? What is involved in it? That kind of measurable number piece. Moving on to the third component of the pre-application is the budget. We have provided a budget template for you all to use, but building a budget takes work. And so when you're building your budget, we do recommend that you're thorough, detailed, and accurate as best you can to describe the accurate costs of the project. And our budget template gives you the allowed budget categories for this type of work. And the guidance, the pre-application guidance, includes a full description of so many different pieces that could be eligible components. But a couple ones I want to highlight for folks with this is that RTP will fund final engineering and design, permitting, if it's determined it needs an archaeological resource assessment and ARA, that's all eligible for funding. But I want to call out that RTP also will fund project administration and grant administration, right? Like doing the work in the field as well as managing the project. Like that, those are eligible pieces for RTP. If you have someone on your staff, this can contribute towards their staff salary. If you don't have someone on staff, this could be our opportunity to contract out this work to be able to provide it. We know in the past that we've heard that RTP grants as a federal pass-through, as a federal subrecipient grant, they can be a lot of work. And so we encourage folks to build in that capacity to manage these projects within their budgets. It'll also fund all the construction costs like labor, tools, and materials, equipment rentals, publication and research design fees like map printing. But those are all categorized in the budget. And in the budget template, you'll have this opportunity to provide both your description of what you're asking for RTP and what your match is going to be covering. But it's important to note within your budget that if there is an ineligible cost as listed in the pre-application guidance, that is not eligible for match. Only eligible costs can count towards the match requirement. And we just want to remind you, as you're doing your budget planning, RTP is a reimbursement grant. So however big your project decides to go, just know that you'll have to be able to front those expenses, submit for reimbursement, and then get a reimbursement from the state, generally 4 to 6 weeks after we get that request. And you can submit for reimbursement as frequently as quarterly. And I share this because some of the questions we've got in the past are, well, how big of a grant can I go for? We have that maximum of up to $50,000 in terms of the request for non-motorized projects. But whether or not your organization or your town can actually accomplish a $50,000 grant where you spend all the funds up front on a quarterly basis is based on your own entity's operations and needs. So it's just something to consider as you're building your budget, is how big you can grow. Also, within the financial piece, we want to cover what you're going to be expected to give us, because this might then inform the type of work you're planning to do and how much you want to plan for that grant project administration component. So know that, like, from a budget perspective, when you submit for reimbursement from the grant, you're going to be required to submit documentation for all your expenses and all your match. We need to see that confirmation. And so this is things like copies of invoices, receipts, those sorts of pieces for work that's being contracted out or external purchases. For staff time, it'll be things like labor reports or timesheets. If you're counting volunteer time, know that you're going to have a volunteer sign-in system so that you can track those hours. If you have a donation, we'll need to see a receipt from that. Um, and then in terms of your budget planning, just know that RTP defines, and really all of our state grants define equipment purchases as anything over a $5,000 value. And that's a single item with a single purchase price. So we're not talking about $5,000 worth of gravel. We're talking about, like, hey, we want to buy a used truck or we want to buy a trailer. Those have come up in various proposals in the past. But really, those come with a lot of fine print. So while RTP does fund maintenance, if you purchase equipment with an RTP grant, it can forever and only be used for those RTP grant purposes, even after the end date of the grant. So whatever those grant pieces are. So equipment can be really tricky within these federal requirements to be able to document that. Another common question we've gotten in the past is the difference in using staff versus contractors for various types of work, or even volunteers versus contractors. And for the staff versus contractors piece, there are some differences in documentation that I think are important to know now as you're starting to build your budget out, because both are eligible for RTP project reimbursement. With a contractor from an administrative side, you're going to have to go get competitive quotes, and then you'll need to get invoices from that contractor to document their work and their expenses. For staff time that going into it, we need a labor report, which is, what are they doing on the grant? And then a timesheet of how much time is there. In many cases, this can be the same table, the same document, but those are the two pieces we need. What are you doing and how much time does it take? And so we share that because the reporting is a little different. And so we know some grant applicants now might use this information to decide one way or the other. What do you want to put in that budget? Once you start having the information, you're ready to fill out the budget template. We've offered this in Microsoft Excel template. And so some recommendations of do's and don'ts. Make sure 100% of your costs are included in your budget. If it's not in your budget, chances are we can't fund it. And RTP does not have a mechanism built into it to be able to ask for more money later on. So what you ask for in your budget is your request. So make sure everything that you might need for this project that you'd like those RTP funds to cover is included. We also recommend that you write short descriptions for each line of what it is and how you got that number. This is something that is a little bit different from last year's that we really want to call this out because some of the questions that came up with the ranking committees last year were really on budgets that didn't have this information. So we want everybody to have it this year so that everybody can be on a level playing field. And so if you think about it from your perspective as that, like, imagine you're a reviewer and somebody says, I need $20,000 for labor for this project. You're like, what? Wow, that might seem like a really big number. But if you're saying, no, I need $20,000 for labor for this project, but it's based on, we think it's going to be this many hours at this much per hour times this many people, or it's based on this estimate from this other contractor. Like we've been asking around, that's the going rate for contracted labor for this type of project. That helps to substantiate that number in a lot stronger way than just the number that you kind of came up with, it might feel like. And so by being able to justify it, it really helps to demonstrate your case that you've done your due diligence and communicate clearly what it is. We also recommend that you get multiple estimates to build your budgets. I addressed this briefly on the previous webinar if you joined us there, but if you think about getting multiple estimates and building your budget, build your budget for not just the lowest estimate. If you have one contractor that's saying, yeah, I could do that work for $25,000 and two other contractors say it's going to be $40,000, you're much better off budgeting for that $40,000 bucket. Because what if your lowest contractor decides they're moving to Hawaii, right? Like, you want to make sure they have that opportunity, or they're booked out in the time that you would be wanting to work with them. So build your budgets to be able to have choices later on based on those estimates. Some don'ts to get into, similar to the work plan, is don't name contractors in your budget. In general, don't just say like, oh, the labor is XYZ company. That's what it is. Don't put that in. Instead, say it's contracted labor. You can reference quotes, like if you have estimates from multiple companies, you say, oh, this is the contracted surveyor based on the estimate from such and such company. You can use that piece, but try not to say the line item is the contractor name. We also encourage you not to lump numbers together across different categories. We know this can sometimes be hard with getting estimates, particularly if you're going for an all-in-one service with an external contractor, right? The materials, the equipment, the labor, those pieces. We really want you to pull those out as best you can in the budget. The budget template also has built-in formulas that will help you do the math. So by not changing them, you're actually going to save yourself work later on when you realize, oh gosh, it's something maybe got mixed up or something like that. So try to use the formulas that are built into the form itself. If you do have questions about match, the spreadsheet will automatically calculate it for you. But what we're looking for with the RTP match is for it to be 20% of the total project cost. So you have whatever the request is from RTP plus your match equals the total project cost. And so that number has to be at least 20%, that rate. You are okay to have more. If you have a 30% match, a 40% match, a 50% match, you are able to do that and to put that in. But just know that whatever is the final submission for that match, that is what you're going to be held accountable to. So just to think about that in terms of how much match do you want to put in if you have more than you need. The match can be cash or in kind. And so pretty much any sources of other cash where it can come in, federal grants, other state funds, like local budget allocations, private donations are all eligible. But so are in-kind things like in-kind donations of material and in-kind donations of labor, like volunteer hours. We use the independent sector's value of volunteer time as a recommended resource for unskilled labor if you don't already have an established volunteer rate to be able to reference. And that's for unskilled. Skilled labor could even be counted as more depending on the documentation that you can come up behind that. If you have somebody who's a professional surveyor who's donating their time, that can be counted at that professional rate. And the last thing about match in terms of how you're calculating it is that you can have pre-award match for planning and permitting purposes only that goes back to 18 months before our anticipated federal highway authorization date. So roughly since January of this year, if you had any planning or permitting costs, you can't be reimbursed for them at this point, but you can count them as match for those. If you have construction work on, say, complementary initiatives, that is not eligible as pre-award match. So no construction costs prior to federal highway authorization can be counted either as match or as that request. And for your match, how you record it in your budget, there is a column in your budget that is one column is just for your RTP request total. The next column is for the match. And so you'll just split them out by line items as it makes sense within those categories. And for the full application, we tell you this now, but not because you're going to need it now, but you'll need it for the full application. We want you to be prepared to provide a narrative of where the match is coming from and what is the status of that match. So this is not information you need for the pre-application phase, but if you haven't started to think through like, well, where is this money going to come from? We need this extra $5,000. It's time to start thinking about it now so that when you're ready to do the full application, if you're invited to submit, you have those answers at hand. And just to show you the example of the budget form, we've got this spreadsheet to use. Again, the first column is for general expense names. Then you've got those columns that you can use for the description and the explanation, and then RTP request and budget match request. And so this example, again, is at the end of the pre-application guidance. So you can look at it as a reference for the level of detail that we're recommending within established budgets. All right, I think the next one, I'm going to turn it over to Claire for the climate resilience risk form.
Thanks, Lauren. The climate resilience risk form is a new form this year. This is the trial year for this form, and the goal is to better understand how different projects that are being submitted to our grant programs may be vulnerable to climate impacts. This is informed by what we know is happening in the climate, what we've seen with climate changes in Vermont with large-scale rain events, flooding events, dry spells, invasive species. And what we're trying to do is have a better understanding of both what we can recommend to grantees to do to reduce risk to climate, but also understand where the projects fit in the landscape, so we understand what public dollars are invested in public infrastructure and how vulnerable that might be. So what we're covering in the climate resilience risk form is a fillable PDF available online. And what it covers first, it goes through 5 different categories, sorry. And the first is the project context. It's where is your project located relative to other features and relative to the topography of the area. We know that there are different risk components for a project that's on a slope versus a project that's in a valley. And we want to know that so we can assess the project better. The next is just the design of the project. What is being used to build the project? What might be installed on a trail, for example, to prevent erosion, and how steep that trail might be. Now, these general design questions are really about what we know about best practices for building trails and other infrastructure that you can apply for RTP for, like parking lots, signs. The next is water features. We know in Vermont that water features are prevalent on our landscape and are one of the highest risk areas for in any kind of infrastructure that we install in our forested landscape. So we have questions about proximity to rivers, streams, and wetlands, and floodplains and landslides, all of the things that we know what happens when water is on the landscape. Now, our questions are really about both the infrastructure that we're funding for you to put in, whether it's a trail or a bridge or a parking lot, and how resilient that will be to climate impacts, but also how much that infrastructure may impact the natural resources ability to be resilient to those same climate impacts. So it's a two-sided assessment, and that's where our questions are coming from here. There's also ecological considerations when planning for trails and thinking about the resilience. We know that invasive species make both the area around a trail and a trail less resilient. So we ask questions about that. And we certainly don't want to reduce the biodiversity of an area and reduce the resilience for the ecosystem to respond to climate change. And then finally, we have a couple of questions about visitor management at the site. And visitor management is how are you going to communicate to people who are using the resource, and whether you are considering or not considering something like closing after a rainstorm, which is a common practice for, say, mountain biking, less common for hiking. And with all of these together, just as a reminder, there aren't any wrong answers. We're assessing how risky the project is. We will get back to you if you are invited for a full application with recommendations, if there are any, based on your answers, or requests for explanations of the answers. But please answer the questions to your full ability. Don't try and think what we will want to see. We want to know what your plans for the project are, not what you think will be more resilient. We want to know what you're actually planning to do. Some tips and tricks for this guidance document. Like I said, this is new. We did build a separate guidance document that specifically defines every single question that we ask in the climate resilience risk form. This will help with things like, is this a check dam, or is this a rock step, or is this a step zone? We have those all defined for the purposes of the form. I will note that because this is our first time, you may run into questions that we didn't anticipate, and we are here to answer those questions if you write to us at our email inbox. The next tip is that we are asking specific technical questions. If you are anticipating, if you have a plan that you solicited from a trail contractor, for example, you may want to, with that solicitation, share this document to let them know, like, these are the questions that we need answered when we're talking about planning this project. If not, it could be someone in-house who understands exactly how the project will be built and what the different risk factors are. Another tip, which is maybe kind of obvious, but maybe not, is that a lot of these risks are really temporal. They happen only at certain times. And especially with water on our landscape, we know that it happens after rain or during rainstorms. If you have the chance in the next month or so to go out to your project site after a rain, that will really help you understand how water is moving across the landscape and help you answer a lot of our questions. A lot of our questions are also, like, you can get the answers through online research. Like, we have something called ANR Atlas. We have a link to it in our form guidance. But you also want to check that in real life. So if you see that there's a temporary stream nearby, then you might want to check to make sure that it actually exists and it's not just on the GIS in the computer. So we are asking you to, like, spend some time out at your project site in order to answer the questions on the form. And the last is, we know that RTP funds a lot of different types of projects, and some of the questions will not be relevant for your project. Please only choose unknown if it's an option that makes sense. Please try to the best of your ability to answer all the questions, and don't go to the unknown or not applicable choice right away. Like, first consider whether you really could answer that question if you went out to visit the site one more time, or if it really is a non-applicable or unknown. The form is, like we said, a fillable PDF. It should work on any computer. Again, everything is defined in the form guidance. And one thing to note is we will accept more than one of these forms if it makes sense for your project. We want to have at least one. But if your project is two very different things, like a parking area and a rock staircase, I would recommend having one risk form for each of those things, because they will be such different answers. But if you have a section of trail where you're replacing 5 water bars and fixing the drainage on a, say, half-mile section of trail, it is also appropriate to have all of those in one risk form. It really has to make sense for your project. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out again. I think that's all I've got, Lauren, and back to you for permit information.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so the next step up is the last piece, which is our permit results. So for the pre-application phase, you're going to need to submit a PDF of the permit navigator results or the project review sheet for your project. And even if you own the land you're working on and all the work is happening exactly in the same place where stuff already exists, you still need to do this. This is a way to just show us what the anticipated permits are going to be for your project based on your project type. And so these are two tools that are offered by the Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC. And the permit navigator tool is great if you have projects that are taking place at one site or one location. And it's an online tool that you can do at any point where you click the bubbles and answer as many of the questions as you can fully. And then at the end, it'll spit out a report that it can be a PDF that'll show you the potential permits you need. The project review sheet will give you, in many ways, the same end result, right? It's the list of potential permits you might need and the folks to contact to learn more. But it is for more complex projects. So if you have a super long trail project, like miles that we're going to do on this work, and it spans many, many landowners and goes over all kinds of terrain, that's when the project review sheet comes into play. And so this is not a tool that can be done at any point. This does require professional review by DEC staff. And so this is a piece that if your project is going to need this, you should start this at least 1 month before the deadline, which is like now, today, if you haven't already. So we're getting close. So make sure you do that as best you can if that's the piece you need. And just to give you a little bit more about permitting pieces, is that remember that the report that you're gonna submit to us, that permit navigator report or project review sheet, at the end of the day is just a list of permits you might need at the state level. The next step is to actually contact the people on that list to see whether or not you might actually need a permit or not. Because they'll be able to inform you. In some cases, they'll just be able to say, no, you don't need this permit. And then you can just take it off your list and move on. Other times they might say, we don't know. Here's what you need to do to find out. And other places they might say, yeah, you're going to need that permit, and here's the process to apply for it. So it's really good to get that information now to start building that into both your work plan and budget. But these tools are incomplete, like depending on where your project is, if there are potentially municipal permits that are related to that, that's not going to be something that shows up within this plan. As our like if it needs an ARA or not. We have some guidance in the pre-application support document to be able to help advise on that. And then the last piece to know about permits is that many of them do take 3 to 6 months if a permit is needed. So just to build that into your mental timelines when thinking through. Um, because if you do want to use grant funding to support your permitting work, you have to wait until you have a signed grant agreement in order to move forward at that. If you're doing work now and you're saying, yeah, all of our permit work, we're going to count that as match. We're going to cover it outside of the RTP grant. Remember, that can be part of your pre-award permitting and planning costs that would be eligible for match. But the big thing to know about those permit pieces, it is to your advantage to do this now. We're not pushing you just because we want you to start early, but it's because that we have heard from grantees in the past that permits can take time and they can be expensive. And if you weren't planning for that as part of your timeline or part of your budget, it can be really, really hard. And you're like, we thought we were going to do everything from it. And so similar to other contracted work, like if it does need to have, you need a wetlands delineation or you're going to hire someone to help with your permits, it's good to get quotes for those now so you can build it into your budget and make sure they're in your budget if you want to use those RTP costs. And in terms of timing, I mentioned at the beginning when we were talking about work plans is that we have this roughly 18-month period, right? We have most of field season 2025 starting in July through the end of December 2026. Of those 2 summer field seasons, we recommend that you just start planning now that field season number 1 in 2025 is really just for permitting, planning, and final bids. Like, don't actually plan to do construction work next summer. just because there are pieces as a required grant that, like, if you're planning and saying, yeah, we're going to do it, and then it's determined you need additional permit work, you need additional surveying, you need these other pieces, we don't want that to throw off your whole project. So just plan for the first summer to be permitting and final planning. And then that summer 2026, that's the summer that we recommend that you plan, that is your construction season for this, that you're going to do a lot of the core work. So those are the 5 materials that you'll need to submit. All of the templates, resources for this are available online on our website. But the one other piece we haven't gotten to yet is, this is something we're flagging now. Again, not needed for the pre-application, but will be needed for the full application, is that every applicant to the full application is going to need to submit a UEI, a unique entity identifier. This is a government assigned number that you can get through sam.gov. If you do not already have one, whoever is applying, the entity that is applying for this grant, now is the time to start to get one. It can be an extended process. If you have one and you just haven't kept your SAM registration up to date, because we know that process has changed, guess what? New news. It's okay this year. You just have to have a UEI. It doesn't have to be an active registration. But just if you don't have one yet, we recommend that you get one now. Or if you're like, there's no way we can get it, to start to think about who might be a potential fiscal sponsor. Say if you're a chapter, is there a different group that you could ask about fiscal sponsorship to have those conversations sooner rather than later? A few other resources we're going to recommend for you is that online on the website, in addition to all the templates, we do have a sample grant agreement up here. You know, we always build grant agreements custom to the actual project and the actual grantee that's there. But I encourage you review this now, because this has all the fine print of all the things that you're going to have to follow, just so you're not surprised. And you're like, oh, I didn't know we needed to have workers' comp insurance. We didn't know that we needed this type of coverage. We didn't know we needed, you know, these were the reimbursement requirements. All of that is spelled out in the grant agreement. So if you've never seen an FPR grant agreement, I strongly encourage you to check out the sample online, just so you can build that into your planning pieces. And then we've mentioned throughout this session that there is a pre-application guidance document. This is going to be a great resource for you going forward, especially as you dig into the materials to help you learn more. And some new things about this document this year is that we've played with the formatting a little bit based on the request that we got last year. There are a lot more examples in this year's pre-application guidance document, and we've tried to highlight them and color code them out in orange boxes throughout this thing, the document. So as you scroll through, you're like, okay, well, they're talking about trail names. They're talking about this 150-word description. What should that look like? We've given you examples using pretty generic terms, right? ABC trail, XYZ spur, pretty generic answers, but it's a model of something you could use to see what the type of information we're looking for. We've also included in the pre-application guidance these gray boxes that either include application tips or really key project information. So just to be on the lookout for that as you build your application. And as I said, there's those full work plan and budget examples at the end. This is also not the only support that we're going to be able to offer for the next month while folks are still working on RTP applications. We have 2 more sessions planned. These first 2 sessions have been our space to mostly talk to you about things that we think you should know. But the next 2 sessions on Thursday, November 21st and Tuesday, December 3rd are really open-ended. We won't come to those calls with much of an agenda. It is really your space to come to us and ask your questions live. Because if you've reached out to us already to say, hey, I have questions, will you meet with me at one-to-one? Our answer is generally no, mostly because at this stage in the process, we don't have capacity to meet with everybody one-to-one. So we encourage you to use these live conversation spaces as those opportunities to ask questions live. We also are really responsive to email. So please, if those times don't work, your question is more time sensitive and you need to get it answered before the next office hours, please, please, please email us. You know, something doesn't make sense in the guidance, email us and we'll be happy to respond. We have our whole grants team is responding to questions in that inbox. So it's your great first stop place to go. And so the last piece I want to just remind everybody here at the end of the webinar is that we are just about a month out from the deadline for these applications. So RTP pre-applications are due by the end of the day on Friday, December 6th. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we'll open it up for questions. What else would you all like to know about these pre-application materials? You can drop those questions in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable, you can unmute and ask them live.
I actually don't have access to the chat box. Is that true for everybody?
Do you have a question? Happy to answer it here.
Okay. Regarding the, so I went through the permitting process and, well, not the process, the online form, and it's suggesting that a wetlands permit may be needed. How far into that process do we need to get in order to successfully submit a pre-app?
You don't have to you do not have to secure your permits. Even for the full application phase, you do not have to secure your permits before you apply. What we recommend is that you reach out, as a piece for the pre-application. If it says you might need a wetlands permit, like step one, like at minimum before the end of the pre-application period, contact the person that they identified in that report to see if you actually do. Because they might have different pieces where they can clear your right away and say, absolutely not, you're not going to need it. Or they might say, yes, and here's your next steps.
Okay.
So the permit specialists are the great ones to be able to tell that to. And so we recommend you do at least that part now so that you can build it in, particularly with wetlands permitting. It really varies depending on the project and what other work you're planning. I think, Claire, I might ask you to tag in if I'm missing anything with this, but I know in the past there have been projects where grantees have been surprised that all of a sudden there's like $15,000 of wetlands delineations that they needed to do. And so like that's the piece that we don't want to have you be surprised by later on.
Okay.
Claire, anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I would add that that has happened, that what Lauren just said, but also I think more often actually it has happened that the permit specialist will review and say you don't need a permit.
Okay.
So the permit navigator function is pretty conservative. It will flag a lot more projects than need permits because they want to just have the chance to review them. That's no guarantee. I don't, like depends on your project, but that is just one note that it's possible that, like, especially if delineation has to occur, that there will be a significant cost, but it's more probable that they will say we don't need a permit or we need a site visit, in which case you could either try and do that now or note that for later in your budget.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
and I'll say the one last thing to add about that, it's something that's happened in the past with a couple grantees that I can think of, is they've realized starting to go down the permit train right now that they're like, actually, we would prefer to reroute this whole section of trail so that we don't have to do that. And this is the better thing to do sooner rather than later, just because like that could inform so many other things for you. So that's really what we recommend at this point.
Okay. If nobody else has a follow-up question on that, I could ask another question. That's all right.
Sure, go for it.
Okay.
And then I'm seeing a couple folks other ready. It looks like Kelly and Michael might be queuing up too.
Well, that's fine.
So,
I can pass it
yeah,
off to somebody else if somebody else wants to go or ask another, whatever.
go ahead, ask it right now.
Okay. On the climate resiliency form, there's a question, are there steep slopes over 20% and muddy or wet areas in the project area? if we're moving, say, a trail or a section of trail away from those steep slopes or away from those wet areas, do we mark that there are steep slopes and wet areas in the project area, even though those are, we'll be decommissioning maybe some of those trails and not really doing much there, but moving those away? Do we mark they are present or not present?
Claire, you muted.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull up exactly what we said in the form guidance. If you are moving it fully away, so there's no steep slopes at all, you don't need to say, yes, there are steep slopes. But if there are steep slopes, just trying to pull it up so I get this right. I think we said like 50 feet, but like a good rule of thumb, we say is about 25 to 50 feet. And one of the things that we will do with this form is if we get in the pre-app guidance and it says, yes, there's muddy areas within 50 feet, say, then we'll say like, hey, can you explain this to us in the full application? And then you can say, we are moving this away and we think this is far enough away because there's enough of an elevation change between the muddy area and the site of the new trail. So then we're like, great.
So if we're moving, say, a section of trail 150 feet away from that steeper muddy area, then we would just say no.
Just say no. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I see we're coming up on time. Just to address that right here, if you have to hop off at the top of the hour, we are going to be sending out both the recording and all the resources that we shared during the session via email afterwards to everybody who's registered. But we're also, I'm happy to hang on and continue answering questions well beyond the top of the hour. So with that, next up, we're going to Michael.
Hi, thanks. Just wanted a quick clarification on what types of work would be eligible for pre-award matching. If we were to solicit a professional to help with application materials, say a landscape architect to come up with aerial views or concepts, that would be eligible for pre-award match payment.
Yep, planning and permitting.
Yep, and just wanted to make sure that fell under the use of the word planning, and also that would not be eligible for grant funding because it is pre-award work. Great.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Oh, thank you for that. Kelly.
Yeah, just a quick clarification on landowner permission. In our case, we're the applying entity and own 100% of the land, but there's a conservation easement. We do have permission from the land trust and it's within that easement, but just wondering if we need to provide signed permission from the land trust as well, or if we just check that we own 100% of the land.
If there is an easement on it, it's not quite the owned in full. It is the owned in restriction piece. So there are some additional pieces that you'll need to provide. For the pre-application phase, you don't actually need to give us any of those documents. You just need to be able to check that in the application, right? That you don't, do you have it in full? Like, do you have it? What do you need? And so in terms of what else do you need from the land trust, I think there's a lot that depends on like the way your easement was written, because if it is clear within the language of the easement that all the work that you're doing is completely eligible, then just a copy of the easement is all you need. You don't have to reach out to the land trust as a second piece. But if there is gradation in there, some questions, like getting that signed letter of permission from the easement holder is a great idea. And that just varies easement to easement across the state based on what's in the language.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
And just as a clarification, when we say owning 100% of the land, that doesn't mean 100% of the like project area. It means like 100% of the rights to the land. And so if there is an easement, they own a percentage of the rights to the land. So it's not owned in full. And it, like Lauren said, it really depends on how that easement was written and what rights that easement holder holds. If they don't hold public access rights or project development rights, you don't need that permission.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a question in the chat, Lauren.
Perfect.
Allie asks, do you award grants to applicants if they apply in 2 different years?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So all of the ranking criteria are included in the pre-application guidance for everything. So I want to start with that. But the short answer is yes, maybe, depending on which way you want to interpret how that question was meant. If you're asking if an applicant can receive, say, if they got a grant last year, if they can reapply this year, the answer is yes. But the way the RTP ranking criteria is developed is that there is an additional preference for applicants that did not get funding in the most recent consecutive year. So not back-to-back funding. If you got funding 2 years ago, you still get those basically new applicant preference points. But if you were funded in the most recent round, you just don't get those points. You're still welcome to apply, but you don't get those preference points. So from that perspective, yes, but it comes out into the ranking. If your question was more about, could I submit a project that actually would get, say, the 2025 funding, and then I also need 2026 funding because it's really $100,000 project. We will only consider and review one phase of the project generally at a time. There might be some rare circumstances where we're anticipating some bigger projects, but on the whole, we just do one phase at a time. So just submit to this round what you think would be a part and accomplishable within this particular grant round. Hopefully that answers your question. If there's anything else, feel free to unmute here and ask for additional clarification.
A very specific question.
Yes.
I know you already answered about, this has to do with the climate resilience form. And our project consists of 5 segments. And for this, it's changed a little bit, or actually someone pointed out that I didn't think about a certain specific situation for our application. And we'll be applying for one segment to be completed, but also for signs throughout the project. So on all 4 segments, and then also a vegetative screening for residents that are very close to the trail. There are a couple that are really impacted with privacy issues. So that's a segment that's being done in phase 1 this coming spring, or 2025 spring. So you just said earlier, you know, if we're going to do signs, then that means the whole entire we should do the whole project. Or do I do one for signs and one for the segment and then one for the screening? I say that because also we're going to have to pay someone to help us do this. We don't have that. I don't feel confident, and I don't, one of the premises of our project was to make it more sustainable and resilient. And so the engineers know what this terminology means, and I don't want to lose any points by making a mistake. What's your suggestion, please?
So we only need the risk forms for the parts of the project that we're funding, first of all. So we only have control or any decision-making authority over what RTP, you're asking for RTP for. Not, like, it sounds like you have a really big project, and so you don't need to do a form for everything that is like a supplemental part of the project. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding that you're not going to apply for all 5 of those segments for this year.
Correct, just one, but also signage for all segments and a vegetation screening on a different segment, not the one that we're requesting funding for through RTP.
Are you requesting funding for the vegetative screening?
Yes.
For this? Okay. So so I would do it for the segment that you're talking about. I think that the vegetative screening will be actually really easy to fill out the form. Like, I don't think that is a situation where most of the things are going to be not applicable. Like, like if you're putting in a vegetative screening, it's not really applicable whether they're like, you're not going to put anything about rock steps or erosion control. Like that's not the point of it. So I guess my advice for you is like to not like, don't overthink it too much. But yeah, I would focus on the trail segment because that's really what the risk resilient form is like focused on. Of course, like we want to know with a vegetative screening, like the resilience of that infrastructure, that like living infrastructure will be too. Like if it's too close to an eroding bank, it's not going to work, right? And I trust that you have thought of that. And so then you just put that into the form. And honestly, like if you look at that form and you're like, I cannot figure out how this could apply to the vegetative screening, just let us know, because like I said, this is our first year. We tried to focus that risk form on our most common grant requests, like what we generally have gotten in the last 5 years. I don't think that we've funded a vegetative screening in the last 5 years. So like we always get that, like this isn't uncommon. We get like new things that we never thought of. So if you look at it and you're like, this does not apply, email us. We'll look at it. We'll figure it out with you. You may not need it for that project component. But for the trail segment that you're talking about, like that sounds like it's much more applicable.
Absolutely. And I understand the purpose, and I think it's timely and important. It's, yeah. Thank
But we
you.
just have to figure out how to make it work, right? And so your help in that will be much appreciated as well.
Right. Great. I understood. Thanks for your answer. I appreciate it. Okay.
When I was nudged by somebody about a previous question that came up in the last webinar, that they wanted additional clarification around being able to budget for inflation. So this is a piece that's in the pre-application guidance of like, make sure you're welcome to plan for inflation within your budget lines, right? Like you're potentially planning a budget now for construction work that's going to happen in summer 2026. So we recommend when you build your budgets that you plan for inflation within the budget lines. So not a single line item that says inflation, but within your math to be able to do that. And I did, since the last webinar, confirm with the Federal Highway Administration, like their recommended range is 5 to 15%. Just depends on the scope of work it is. So if you're like, yeah, I got a quote for $10,000, you can add 5 to 15% to that as terms of your mental budget math. They did say if you want to go above that, they're not going to stop it. But from our perspective, getting through the ranking committee, we know that you're going to need to make a solid case and have a really strong explanation of why you want to do that higher inflation rate. Right? Like, do you have the last 3 years of steel prices and the number is different than 5 to 15? And that's why you're coming in and you've got that evidence to support it, because without that evidence, chances are it's not going to make it past the ranking committee. I think I shared on the last one that we did have a proposal that came in through one of our grant programs last year that had a 40% contingency rate. And the ranking committee just looked at that and said, that doesn't seem like they know enough details, right? Like they don't have enough information because they didn't know anything other than that percent, which is really like half their budget was to go for things that they didn't know. So that was how they interpreted that as the ranking committee. So just make sure if you're doing anything above that 5 to 15% within your budget, that you're already mentally preparing for the full application of how you're going to justify that. Cool. Are there any other questions about RTP and these pre-application materials? Well, with this, our email door is always open. Please feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you do have questions. You'll be getting this recording later, but otherwise, thank you so much for being here and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.